Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to bipcot.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network on theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. So today I have Darrell Becker, who is coming in from the Big Island in Hawaii. He's a acupuncturist, Chinese herbalist, practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine in general. He's a voluntarist and advocate for the trivium and nonviolent communication. His website is voluntaryvisions.com, and his Facebook group is Voluntary Visions. And we're going to discuss a little bit about his path to voluntarism and how that relates to traditional Chinese medicine, because we are both practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine, which is pretty cool. Not too many of us that are also voluntarists. And also his thoughts on nonviolent communication, peaceful parenting, and relationships, because that's an awesome topic that I think a lot of anarchists can use some help in. So, Darrell, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Yeah, it was great to be here with you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I heard about you from Nick Hazelton. He had you on his show. He's like, you got to get Darrell on. You guys are so much in common. So I'm like, all right. So, we connected, and, you seem to have a lot in common with me, which is very cool, very interesting. So I'm like, how often are you going to meet a, acupuncturist, herbalist, voluntarist in your lifetime? It's not too common. But yeah, so please get into a little bit of your path to voluntarism. I guess Chinese medicine came first with you, and then voluntarism. So yeah, so please share with my audience your history.
Sure. So how I started into holistic medicine, as I like to think of it, and then eventually I settled on which gang am I going to go into, and I settled on the gang of the Oriental medical gang, basically. I had health problems. I got introduced to a holistic healthcare practitioner who was a chiropractor who in Vermont also did acupuncture. And eventually, after some years, he invited me into his practice to work as his assistant. I apprenticed to him for about 4 years. And after the first year, he found me an Oriental Medical College to go through the training so that I could eventually gain a license. He understood that in this world, it does help to have a medical license if you practice medicine as a form of protection, which that's what I was mentioning. That's kind of like joining a gang. Like, are you going to go Crips or Bloods? What are you going to do? You want some protection. So I chose the Oriental Medical Gang due to the ease of things. And the more I researched it, the more I found that it had a great deal of benefits. It's one of the forms of medicine that's the least under attack, in my opinion, compared to, say, chiropractors, naturopathic doctors, osteopaths. Many of them often can have huge repercussions if they go down certain holistic healthcare paths for their clients. But for us, in our field, with our license, not so much. There's a great deal of acceptance. So that's been some 18 years now going down that path. And that's also what brought me to move to the Big Island. I went through Oriental Medical College the first time, and I didn't do the good enough research to find out that the school was majorly in trouble. So after I graduated and took a year off, I found out that the school had closed down and that I could not get a license there in Vermont. And so I sat on it. I literally practiced under the table for a while, trying to figure out what I was going to do until I found a way to basically find a college that would accept me, and I would have to go through Oriental Medical College all over again. So that's why I moved to the Big Island of Hawaii, to go through Oriental Medical College all over again, and figured if I was going to do that much, I'd like to do it in a nice setting. So that was one of the reasons why I chose to move here. And upon moving here, I was thinking and listening to the beginnings of podcasts back then in 2008 when I moved here. And I came upon James Corbett, the CorbettReport.com. I started basically coming upon all types of esoteric information, redicecreations.com, and the interesting shows on that, and GnosticMedia.com, that was with Jan Irvin. And through those venues, I got introduced to some interesting people. One of them especially was Brett Veinotte, who was just starting up his podcast, School Sucks Podcast, basically, schoolsucksproject.com. And in one show of listening to Brett speak on the subject of voluntarism and voluntary interactions as juxtaposed to coercive interactions, and instantly it was like the light hit me. I saw that there was no longer any real reason for coercion of any form or collectivism for every form. I was starting to see many different pieces of the puzzle coming together. Because before that, back in Vermont, I was voting Democrat. I was thinking in terms of what is often called a modern-day liberal. I was thinking in that format. I was afraid of guns. I was basically not trusting the general choices of the average person, but instead looking for, I would say, coercive restrictions upon people, but then still knowing that there was a lot of corruption going on. Moving here, listening to these podcasts, Brett's show, he introduced me to Wes Bertrand. And Wes Bertrand has the Complete Liberty podcast, which he did for a number of years. It's an excellent production. That was pretty much a way of, opening it up. That and also Free Domain Radio with Stefan Molyneux. It very much like, for the beginner person, it sews up questions that are really important to ask. And then in finding my own set of answers, some of which were supplied by these people I mentioned, but I found some of my own answers. I was connected to a variety of people through Wes Bertrand. He basically created a very excellent little Google Plus Hangout that I was accepted into to train in nonviolent communication. That's a thing that I'm also known for on the internet. So, yeah, that was a big, long rambling of how I came to be this way. And right now, when I go on people's podcasts, they are often asking me, Darrell, what's the trivium? Darrell, what is nonviolent communication? And what is it that's different about the way you do it versus other people and the way they use those tools? And that's often what I cover. But, yeah, you're right. You and me, as licensed acupuncturists and holistic healthcare providers, we don't find a lot of our kindred who are also like-minded, in terms of we've studied bigger questions of economics and regulatory capture and opportunity cost and all these very fascinating concepts that when you ask the questions and you really seek substantial answers, it really goes somewhere. And what I found in my colleagues, and maybe I'll ask about how you found your classmates when you went through school, they're just busting their butts trying to get through school.
Right.
And they're just really trying to learn these things for the first time. Yeah. When I went through Oriental Medical College twice, the second time, I basically was getting a nice review on things, plus getting the nuances of other things, like really, really relearning things in a more substantial way. And that gave me a lot of free time to learn other subjects, such as what is voluntarism? What is the non-aggression principle? What is nonviolent communication? What is the trivium method of critical thinking? And answering those, I found that there were amazing possibilities to put them together, and people like you out there. So, a lot of my colleagues, they really become very focused on just getting through, and then after they get through, they're just trying to make ends meet. It's like as if they don't have a lot of time as entrepreneurs. But I'm thinking that as I check in with them over the years, they tend to lean more and more towards this philosophy of, I would say, very respectful of personal choice and very reluctant and distrustful of things that are coercive externally, things that are extrinsic motivators, such as punishments and rewards. So, that in a nutshell, perhaps I took too long on that, but that's how I came to these philosophies.
Yeah, that's beautiful. let's see, talking about my colleagues. Yeah, when I went to school, the Oriental Medicine College, I did have that similar feeling that people were struggling. And I mean, with me, I always attribute to the fact that I absolutely loved the information that I was learning, about the acupuncture and herbs. So it wasn't really a chore, and it wasn't difficult for me. I loved it. I retained it. I was just devouring books left and right during college, not on economics and voluntarism, but on Chinese medicine. And I had so many books, in addition to school that I was reading just because I love the topics. And so that was fun. What was it? There's one Paul Pitchford. What's it called? Healing with Whole Foods. Healing with Whole Foods. There's the Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity. There's a bunch of really good ones that I got that were not required reading, but I just devoured all of them because it's just such awesome content. I thought it was really cool. I got a big poster that showed had a big yin yang symbol, and then in the yin yang symbol had all the foods arranged according to taste, temperature, channels, organs entered, and all that. And so you can easily see at a glance the characteristics of food in terms of Eastern nutrition. And then I also got another big poster of like 450 herbs that I learned, and a little picture of them and the name of it. What is it underneath? So you could look at it at a glance. And so all this stuff I got into it, and I just saw my fellow students just struggling, and I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong with, they're like, man, I pulled an all-nighter, didn't sleep anything last night. I was downing Red Bull just studying for this test. I'm like, what are you talking about? I slept fine. So didn't really have a problem with that. And then after college, I just kept studying different things, and my path through holistic medicine, took me to learn more about GMOs and vaccines and Monsanto and, DuPont and those guys. And then, the crony corporations and, why they're so evil. Everybody, I was just actually talking with somebody recently. We were on a camping trip, and I was talking to this one guy, and it's like I realized something that I think it's very easy for people to look at like Chase or Bank of America or Halliburton or Monsanto or DuPont or Syngenta, and they look at these huge corporations, right? Or let's say Chevron and Texaco, and they're destroying the environment. They're polluting, small villages. They're, wreaking havoc. They're supporting war. They get rich off of war, and then the reconstruction after war. And so they look at these corporations and are like, this is why capitalism sucks. This is why business is evil. And it's so tempting to look at it like that, and I think I did as well. And then once you learn more about economics and the nature of the state and anarchy and things like that, you gain a deeper understanding about why they're like that. And there's a phrase that I like, which is hate the game, not the player. Right? So if there exists an institution of violence and power, then of course certain companies will want to appeal to that institution to gain favors and protection and immunity. Right? It's only natural that they would want to do that, and through using that institution, destroy their competitors. Right? Through protectionist laws and regulations and minimum wage laws and all that kind of stuff. And only later it made sense to me, like, wow, it's not that they're not the root. It's like you destroy Monsanto and Chase and all those, and it's like cutting off the heads of the Hydra. The way I look at it, just another one's going to grow back. Another one's going to grow back.
I think when the confusion happened, like in that little statement that you just said, where people are bearing witness intellectually and emotionally to the situation of Monsanto and people in the war machine and profiting on the front end and on the back end. And then they're coming to that conclusion, capitalism is what that is, and it's evil. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is the problem of definition, which brings it back to why am I such a proponent for having an explicit or explainable method of critical thinking? is because when you actually define your terms, you would find out that what a person like that is actually defining is closer to socialism or communism. What they're defining is a coercive centralized control mechanism. An actual private enterprise, a classical definition of capitalism, is mostly just the respect of people's freedom to choose and make whatever choices that they want, an actual respect of ownership, boundaries, and property, which in its essence is the lack of all conflict. When you have ownership, boundaries, and property respected across the line, then you're going to have lack of conflict because everyone is set in their boundaries. They're staying within their boundaries. Everyone knows each other's boundaries, and things move back and forth on a voluntary basis. And that's pretty close to what capitalism actually would mean. And when you don't know your definitions, you'd be pointing to these things that involve regulatory capture because you haven't studied economics, so you don't even know the term regulatory capture. You haven't studied what even rent-seeking behavior means. What's it like when your business, such as an acupuncture license, is so regulated that it costs that much to enter into the field? And most of my colleagues, maybe a bunch of yours, are sitting on debt, serious debt. Another reason why some of our colleagues work their butts off and they don't have spare time to investigate these topics that we've spent the time on. Now, of course, you can make the time. You could also just happen to be gifted like you are and just happen to easily memorize and spit back information back in the testing days of the early aughts, back when you were tested. And I remember because I went through tests, some small versions of testing back then. The tests were easier back then, I got to tell you. The tests for acupuncturists nowadays are, in most states, the board exams are considerable. They are adaptive frequently, an adaptive computerized test. You get 150 minutes, 100 questions. The timer is ticking down now. You have one chance to enter the correct answer or not for every question. You need 70 of the questions correct. Okay? Got me so far? Yeah. And every single time that you happen to enter the wrong question, the computer will note that. And it has about 30, 35 different categories of knowledge for each test, right? So if you started getting cupping questions wrong or gua sha questions wrong, as I did, it will start throwing you more and more gua sha questions and more cupping questions. And imagine that the test is now becoming more of a gua sha cupping test. It's now like getting serious. Like they're really trying to bust me on this, you know? That's an adaptive test. So the difference between if you went through your board exams 10 years ago or more to right now for the present day batch of acupuncturists, the pressure upon these modern day acupuncture students to get their board, to get through their boards is phenomenally different. And if you were a teacher or a professor in an acupuncture college, as I was a few years ago, you understand that internally, because I've been through this several times, I started my education, technically my first Oriental medical class, 1999. Okay. Pretty close to when you started. Right. And back then it was far easier. Back then a paper test would do, one test to get your license, and you certainly get all the time the specified amount of time, and you could change your answers. And so anyone who went even further before me to get their license, they had a whole different barrier to entry. So it's as if it's like this crazy race in this regulatory capture of our business, where they kept adding hurdles and other events like pole vaulting and stuff to the event of becoming a proficient practitioner. And all it does is make really compliant practitioners who are really good at memorizing and spitting things back, not necessarily achieving clinical results. And they get into the world, as I find out, as some of my colleagues have. And there is the struggle, because then they have to actually completely adapt, throw away most of what they had to do to get through the boards, throw most of it away. And they just need to be practical. They need to achieve and make a portfolio of pleased clientele. So what I will here's what I predict, Danilo. I predict that more of our colleagues, the ones who stay in acupuncture, the ones who don't give up, as I know some who do, the ones who stay will learn more and more about how awful coercive regulation is for everyone and everything, and in no way does it protect people. And more they're going to learn how wonderful it is to have voluntary situations in their life, to have cash under the table and not pay out for that. Or maybe even some of them accepting Bitcoin payment for their services, So my prediction is there'll be more folks like us entering into this philosophy.
Let me play devil's advocate a little bit. What people would often tell me if I were to give that explanation, they'd be like, well, Darrell, it's true that, life would be better if we all engaged in voluntary interaction. Everybody understood property rights and non-aggression. We all respect each other. But that's not reality. You're never going to convince everyone that that's the case. So therefore, your idea will never work. What would you say to somebody like that?
I say to look at their own life right now and how much of their interactions with people in their personal life are voluntary. I would say to look at their own life and analyze that right then. And I think that what I want to know is, like, seriously, how much of their life is really going to be respectful of other people's choices. When you want to go out with your wife and some friends, or like some of your friends, or say like a bunch of people, do you vote on it, on where you're going? Or do you have a discussion, and is it more of a consensus-based thing where everyone is getting the feel for everyone else and what their preferences are? And everyone is getting an idea, because if someone like, look, I'm really allergic, I can't go to that restaurant. And like, yeah, well, we're not going there because he's really allergic to the MSG that's in that restaurant. So we're not going to go there. And because we like this, we want him, because we value being with the person more than, going to number one Chinese.
Right.
And that's an understanding. So when I would ask people about their personal choice in their life, it's mostly voluntary. Now, if people are doing things that are disagreeable to them, such as working in jobs that are disagreeable to them, or being in marriages that are disagreeable to them, or other situations like that, living in a place with a landlord that's disagreeable to them, that is already a setup of conflict right then and there. So when you live within conflict on a day-to-day basis, you could probably easily fall into the trap of convincing yourself that the world is like that. And because it's disagreeable to you, you would prefer that disagreeable things are forced upon others. Mm-hmm. This is a philosophy. Some have called it sour grapes. When I was a professor teaching acupuncture students, I got to do that for a couple of years, 2012, 2014, I mostly understood that what the students were going through was harsh and problematic, just as I was forced to go through it. And all I wanted to do was explain that to them, that I understood that it was harsh, unnecessarily harsh. It was like giving them extra hurdles and other pole vaulting events to do that were completely going to be dropped and thrown away and forgotten as soon as they got to their license. And all I was going to do is to try to give them all the tools I could to make it easier for them, to help them through that, to show them how to get through it easier, to tell them what of the four functions does it serve. Is it simply just to pass tests, which is academic? Is it clinically useful? Clinically as an acupuncturist, is it useful to communicate to other acupuncturists, like having the nomenclature, such as if I said foot xiao yin shu, and that would, that instantly you can communicate to an acupuncturist when you say those words. I just said kidney deficient, to people who don't speak our language, and if you don't understand what I meant by kidney, you also still wouldn't understand what I mean, because it's not just the organ. Yeah. And so then the fourth function, to speak to medical practitioners in other fields to understand, what the ACL joint is composed of. All of these components are there. What I look to is to say, how can I make the situation easier for people? So for the devil's advocate question, to get back to it, I think that when people are living with lots of trauma and conflict in their personal life, if other people are forcing them they will probably have the desire to force other people, because it will be a way to psychologically consider themselves re-empowering. They want to be on the other side of the gun. If people are having voluntary interactions and enjoying the sweetness of that life, they're probably going to want to avoid coercive situations. What I look to do is to isolate whether a person is having a hard time in conflict, and if so, to let them give a voice to it. I don't want to try to convince people to adopt voluntarism. I want to try to help people. And I try to figure out how can I do that by understanding what are they looking for. So every time I talk with someone, I try to understand what are my motives in talking with them and what could be their motives in talking with me. So I've kind of given up on convincing people. And I found that was really, really helpful in making for productive conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I take a similar approach. When people tell me that, what are you going to do in this situation? What if, a dark alley and there's a guy with a gun and there's no police because you're a stateless utopia? What are you going to do then? And it's funny because, I don't pretend to have all the answers to every hypothetical rabbit hole that person might come up with, and I think the first person that does pretend that, you got to question, you got to be skeptical, because the idea is not to have a ready-made solution for every problem. If a problem comes up, you deal with it, right? But I think what's more important is, the way you said, is to bring the question back to the individual and say, well, forget about everyone else, right? We can't control everyone else, but you can control yourself, right? So do you use violence to solve problems in your daily life? No. Do you use other people? Do you advocate for other people to use violence to solve your problems? No. So there, we established a basic understanding of morality and what your moral code is. I think that's good. I think you're a good person. Now, if you become consistent with that, you're not going to delegate a right that you don't have to a politician to do of the very same destructive behavior that you're recommending, right, to other people. So you just have to be logically consistent. And also another thing is that people are afraid. They're afraid of all these things. What happened? What if this might happen? What if this might happen? And then you know what? Sometimes you have to live with the uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't have every solution to every problem. And some people are afraid of that, I guess. It seems they genuinely fear it. So and since for me, embracing voluntarism, I have lost that fear of the unknown, of what might happen if these people come into the geographical region known as the U.S., what might happen, right? So what? Therefore, we should use violence to prevent them to come in? Like what? So I have lost that fear.
I've lost that fear too. My concerns are extremely focused locally and personally, especially personally. Mm-hmm. I'm the one to lift my life up and to make sure that I shoot high, I aim high, so at least I can get somewhere instead of staying complacent with a day-to-day grind. I am the one to lift my own life up. As soon as I have that edge between me and another person and interacting with them, I try to understand what is their perspective, where are they coming from. As we're like you and I in our couple conversations so far, we're coming to that edge of finding out what is your perspective, where is Danilo coming from here, and you're like, where's Darrell coming from here? And I'm like, well, just like you, dude, I've got all these resources. You can look me up, you can see where I'm coming from, but that takes time. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, and most people you can't look them up. They don't have a social media history or portfolio that you can dive through. Mm-hmm. But I can make it faster and just go back through that example you brought up of the person who fantasizes that they're going to delegate authority to a politician. And to me, that's no different than fantasizing a win attributed to the Red Sox or the Yankees. For them to feel awesome about that win that in no way did they participate in. I mean, likely, that is just something that's really important. Do they live in a fantasy? Because voting is a fantasy, in my opinion, statistically, and then gerrymandering wise, and then going a further step, I don't trust the vote counting process. If they believe in that process, that's one thing. That's like people who believe that vaccines are verified to have eliminated and reduced diseases and have been proven to be safe. I like to go both ways. I don't believe or disbelieve those claims. I have a speculation and I a suspicion, and for action purposes, I make an action choice. So in the case of voting and politicians, my speculation and strong conclusion for use of, the purpose of making action choices is my vote does not in any way change the outcome of those people at all, even slightly, is not counted accurately. And the whole scene, politician-wise, is Gangsterville in a big way, is like a huge gangster-oriented kind of thing of things being paid for behind the scenes. And the same thing goes on in the medical industry, the people who made the vaccines. I don't trust them in the same way because I'd be foolish to do so. Their track record is abysmal, medically speaking. Death by medicine. Put that in your search engine and look up that one. Like how many people die yearly from medical procedures and medicine. That's the reported numbers.
Right.
And it's considerable. I mean, it's phenomenal. Not so much in our field. In our field, we're like the opposite. We're like, they're making clients for us. They're totally effing up all these people to the point where at a certain point they are messed up, but they have money and they come to us and we're there to pick up the pieces. And that's just an example of one situation. So whenever I talk to a person, I try to understand how firm and fixed is their attitude and their conclusions and their beliefs. If they're really firm on that, in other words, if they base their self-esteem on being correct about their conclusions, because to actually acknowledge that they were incorrect would be to swallow a huge piece of sadness and frustration and shame for having probably, if they start connecting the dots, created a lot of tragedies in their life and maybe others. Like if they accepted that maybe they got it wrong about vaccines, then they would accept that they gave those to their child. They are culpable for that decision. So to research that after having made that decision, it's the same kind of thing. And if you're old and you were basing your whole life based upon believing in voting in politicians, and it's kind of like Charlie Brown and Lucy pulling back this football, it's like this time for sure, and like how many times do you fly in the air and land on your back before you just know that you're not playing a good game? So when I talk to people, I try to understand where are they coming from attitude-wise. If they base their self-esteem on having the correct conclusion, what I call an addiction to certainty, I keep that in mind, and I don't want to think ill of them. I want to be supportive of people when I interact with them in general. But I do want to find out what makes them tick. I want to understand where they're coming from. And if it's useful, I'll try to help them understand where I'm coming from. I'll try to demonstrate flexibility and humility. Because indeed, like with the things such as politics and vaccines, I could be getting it wrong. I don't have a $1 billion Darrell Institute to verify all of my facts, like I don't have secret agents who can go out and get me the real skinny on what's going down out there. All I have is the same as what you have, Danilo. I search engine things, I compare sources, I compare notes, and apparently you and I have come to some pretty similar conclusions.
Oh yeah, apparently so. So I want to get into your website, but I just want to say one more thing on this topic real quick, is that when I talk to people about Chinese medicine, and they are skeptical of it, I say, do you know what iatrogenic illnesses are?
Yeah, like I said, Google death by medicine.
Yeah, and most people don't. I'm like, it's physician-induced illness. Isn't that an amazing thing? You go to a physician because you have a problem, and he gives you a problem, and then you look up, death by medicine, iatrogenic deaths, and it's like, what is it, like third leading cause of death, third or fourth, something like that, up there with heart attack and stroke and car accidents, and it's amazing, properly prescribed, prescription medication taken as directed, killing people, FDA approved, completely legal, and everything is legitimate, killing people, and then they are afraid of things like vitamins and Chinese herbs and acupuncture. So the fear is so misguided. It's kind of funny. So
I would say close to 1 out of 3 people, when I talk to them, I mean, unless they're very young or extremely old, they know someone who's had acupuncture, or they themselves have had acupuncture. And by and large, more and more people know that your back pain is not getting fixed up by your MD doctor, but it sure is with an acupuncturist in fairly good time. Some people out there, their insurance is covering it. I certainly have a lot of colleagues right now who take insurance money for that. I am on the fence on that one, meaning that I like the money idea.
Right.
But the paperwork of it is substantial.
Oh, yeah.
And the buy-in is substantial too. What I do think is that when people have a medical situation that's serious for themselves or someone they love, it's the worst time for them to do research on the subject.
Exactly.
Because they're so tense about it, and they are quick to dismiss sources of information. It's, again, why I go back to having an explainable method of critical thinking. The trivium method is the one that I promote and use as, I mean, I would have to say the trivium method can lead you to a lot of different things, specifically grammar, knowing your definitions, doing research on the actual components, logic, understanding the connections between those individual components, and also knowing logical fallacies like the appeal to authority and the hasty generalization fallacy. All doctors are this, all acupuncturists are this, etc. That's very hasty and quick. And you flag those things as possibly erroneous conclusions, and you just try to understand real connections. And then from there, it's the practical applications of the first two, the practical applications of putting together knowledge of the components, a full definition for each term, and the connections between them, how it works, how it kind of works, how it absolutely does not work. Kind of like if you and I were to talk about a treatment procedure, and both of us would know that there's like a variety of ways that the same treatment could go and deliver the same, like, excellent results. But there would be a couple ways that we could both describe that would not help the person, or that would be in danger of hurting the person. And we would be able to describe this to a student of ours if we were, here to help someone learn acupuncture and Oriental medicine. We'd be able to help them understand, here's what would probably work, here's what would sort of work, here's what would not work at all, probably. And there's a reason for that, is because we both have the knowledge and understanding and practical applications, which is that's explicit critical thinking. And a lot of people out there, if you ask them what's their method of critical thinking, they probably they don't have a method that they can explain. It's not methodological. It's intuitive. And it's only as good as their intuition is. That's a problem. So there's also this statement I've heard too many people say, you need to get out of your head. You need to get into your heart and feel your feelings more. I've heard that said to me and other people many times. What I see it as is people are often not using their head correctly. So it's like a hamster going around the same ground over and over again in a wheel, instead of covering the subjects methodologically and deliberately, achieving a predicted and desired result. That's the way the brain and thinking and intellectualism is meant to be done, in my opinion. And at the same time, there's the emotions, and there are ways to have a balanced approach to dealing with them as sensors for what's going on. And I like to use nonviolent communication for that, to know how I observe things, to see the feelings I'm having, to know the qualities that motivate both thoughts and feelings, and to take an action or strategy that's going to get what I want. And that's nonviolent communication in a nutshell. I just described it, for anyone who studies that. But for you, Danilo, that could sound really nice and abstract. It sounds like, can you give me a practical application of that? What I'm trying to say is, there are a lot of people out there who are confused. And the best time to study a medical issue or anything that could be very volatile would be when you don't have an emergency. But when people are having an emergency, that's where I see their skill level go down. It would be like the worst time to learn martial arts is when you're being mugged, right then and there. You know,
exactly.
you wouldn't do it then. You'd be practicing for months and months and months ahead of time. It's this, you know, there are a lot of ways to do this. And of course, like I would often mention, de-escalation methods, where you use your mind and you use your heart, you balance yourself internally, and you find what motivates the other person so you can get to a result that you want, which hopefully is nonviolent. Yeah, that was me plugging some of the methods that I like to use.
Yeah. You actually described, you reminded me of Dale Brown, the Viper Threat Management Center. I interviewed him maybe like a few months ago. Awesome interview, awesome guy. And he talked a lot about de-escalation of potentially violent situations, and how successful he is with that, and how much better he's getting at it, with even like without even having guns on him or his employees' person, and so he's getting so good. So basically, they rely on how do you talk to people? You know, how do you relate to them? You know, using psychology to diffuse a very tense situation, and he really does a great job with that. Whereas, you know, most law enforcement is like, shoot first, ask questions later. I felt threatened. You know, I thought he had a gun, so a little bit different.
I'm hoping that just like torrents spelled the death of Blockbuster Video, and hopefully will spell the death of pretty much all services until like Netflix is forced to stream their stuff for 30 cents a month, you know, basically because they can't compete, you know, otherwise than that, because people will just go to a site and grab the whole file, a good quality file for free. Yeah. In the same way, I'm hoping that folks like Dale and threat management companies sprout up all over the place, making police and military completely obsolete. And in the end of it all, I mean, it's a very big juggernaut of the systems of coercion and control, coercive collectivism that is called monopoly governments. 193 different monopoly governments covering this globe right now, something like that. And that's a system right there where you occasionally will hear that nasty phrase, well, if you don't like it, you can just leave, to one of those other ones. You know, it's very much, you out there listening, you can put in your search engine the Jones Plantation, the Larkin Rose video on YouTube. Yeah, that's awesome. And you can get a great little colorful example of the trouble that I'm speaking of. The only way I know of to get rid of a coercive, nasty situation that's a monopoly is to produce pluralities that are powerful. What I'm hoping is more and more practitioners like you and me will be out there. Like, what I want to do is train more practitioners in the future. I want 2 practitioners in every home, minimum. And I want that because who else are you going to look to get things done at 1:30 in the morning when you have a medical problem? Right. Now, there will always be a need for, obviously, like highly equipped hospitals and highly proficient practitioners like you and me to do things that the average person can't do yet. But what I'm hoping is more and more technology like fills in the gap, you know, because there's some are you familiar with electromedicine? You know, for example, Royal Raymond Rife and his technology and things that happened a century ago.
I heard a little bit about him, not too much though.
Yeah, so there were a lot of pioneers back 100 years ago and then some, who were developing systems of what I would call electromedicine, basically. They were using radio frequencies like Rife does. They're using all types of methodologies, including, you know, other frequency generators and lasers and things, as they eventually became developed over years, to treat situations in a really more profound and effective way. So quietly behind the scenes, a lot of medicine has been being developed. And when certain practitioners holding certain licenses use something like a Rife machine, they can become quickly under attack if it's become widely known that they're effectively using it to treat a condition such as cancer, for example. Whereas other medical practitioners, if they're on the down low, they can certainly get away with it. For people who sell the equipment, they can get away with it as long as they're not actually using the equipment for treating wise. For people who are, basically not having any license at all, they don't have any skin in the game, except for they could get in trouble for practicing medicine without a license. So there's been a concerted attack on effective medicine for a long time. It is lucky that our license in our field is not under the same type of attack lens right now. We're part of what's called complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM. In other words, we are like the little lackeys who are called in to help treat a client's nasty nausea symptoms that are going along with their chemotherapy. We're called in to help with to do some cleanup of like a small remedial, like remedying type fashion for some people like us. What I'm looking for and I'm calling for is more people to understand that they have the power to learn to do what we do. Like, I'm pretty sure like the base of what you and I learned both in college and then in clinic can be, begun and finished in maybe like 250, 300 hours. The base of how to treat safely and effectively, and then, continue learning from there. The base of it. So if it's only 300 hours, Danilo, what the hell were we doing in school for so long? Well, we were feeding a beast that was, there to, it was a regulatory capture thing. Right? That's what it was. It was nothing more than that, and there's a lot of cry for, it's for the safety of our clients, Danilo, and they need to know that we're clever and we can spit things back on paper really well, even though that's not what we do in clinic.
They have to justify, they have to justify their federal grants and financial aid.
That's it.
That's
it. And if you happen to have been taking, federal aid and happen to be an acupuncturist listening to this and you're still paying off your debt, for your schooling, I totally get you and I understand. And I also doubt that you're one of the people listening to this, but I'd love to find out if there is one. And yeah, that would be my opinion of it. It is a lot of justification game. It's that type of thing I mentioned earlier, the compulsion to feel really certain about your conclusions instead of to put a question mark at the end of the statement and say, I wonder, what if this was done for the sole purpose of manipulating a certain behavior that's very profitable to a certain minority, Those are my thoughts on that.
I can see very easily how people can look at the idea of licenses and say, well, those are good. How can you hate licenses? I mean, how else are we going to tell the good practitioners from the bad practitioners, right? These are the people that really stuck it out and went through, 2,000 hours, whatever was necessary, and they studied really hard, so they must be the best of the best. How could you be against licenses, Darrell?
And, so you almost have the answer to that, right? I mean,
I like playing devil's advocate.
Okay. Well, my answer to that one, and I want to hear your answer to it too.
Sure.
My answer is I've seen it twice now. I've gone through Oriental Medical College twice, so I got to see colleagues go through and get their boards. And I got to see them struggle. The ones who are really good at tests, not so great in clinic. I got to see that. And I did see a few who were good at both, and that they just happened to multitask in that kind of way. And I saw some really, really good practitioners, Danilo, and they could not pass their board exams.
Yeah.
Twice. And once they got that far, they didn't want to risk the next 3 times because it's expensive to try each time. It's very expensive to take your board exams.
Right.
These people, I saw them in clinic. I worked with them. They were very proficient, but they are horrible test takers and horrible memorizers. That's not what their skill is. Their skill is to help people. So what licensing does is it artificially reduces, it creates artificial scarcity. It reduces the number of available practitioners. It's the same thing for every single market. It's the same thing for all the people who are great at building houses and repairing houses. A contractor license is a procedure. It takes time. It costs money. It's not as bad as our board exams, but it still takes time and costs money. And so it artificially reduces the number of practitioners that you can go out there to hire. So that's what the purpose of licenses are for. Like the old saying, licenses are a monopoly government coercively removing your legal ability to do what you know how to do and selling it back to you.
Yeah.
Basically. And that's basically it. Like,
Exactly.
oh, you know how to fish? Well, here, why don't you pay for the ability to fish? You know how to do this? Well, let's have you pay to do this. It's a lack of trust. It's that external motivations that we're taught in school. And with that, I'm hoping at some point it transitions over. We'll transition to the peaceful parenting. But how would you answer that devil's advocate about license?
Well, the way, that's also the route I would go with. It creates artificial scarcity, erects huge barriers to entry for other people, maybe with without the resources, and they can't enter the field as a result. I guess in a very similar way, like a lot of protectionist laws and all these complex regulations that small businesses have to comply with. So many of them, as a result, never get off the ground. Pretty much very similar, and like minimum wage too. If a business is not profitable enough to pay their workers minimum wage, they can't do that. And so this is like minimum wage for practitioners, or let's say for acupuncturists, where if you don't have the necessary capital to get over that hurdle, you're just never going to make it, right? The state just cuts off the bottom rungs of the ladder, and it just makes people.
And it's about that simple.
It makes people, a certain portion of the population, unemployable as a result, because they don't have a license, right? So and the other thing is, like you said, giving people the ability to enter any field is a wonderful thing, right? Because of course the market will figure out, people will figure out by trying all these people, regardless of if they have a license or not. People are going to try everybody, and then people are probably going to rate them on Yelp and different places on the internet, and of course you're going to figure out the cranks and the quacks from the real practitioners. There's no doubt about it. So I'm definitely not fearful about that. So it's like if you need to seek validation for yourself by getting a license, then what does that say about your skills?
Yeah, and I understand that right now the apprenticeship field, which is the way I started, right, that of being invited by a practitioner to work for them and learn what they do,
right,
is an extremely limited hangout that is hugely under attack by all these regulating agencies. They hate when people are just teaching other people without being regulated and without making unnecessary hoops to jump through. Those are people in the regulatory field. They love to make unnecessary hoops for people to jump through, which again, for every hoop that they erect, there's some money and cha-ching each time,
right.
So there's an economic incentive for the monopolies to perpetuate themselves. And there is an economic incentive for the individual to disassociate from that, and for people like us to give needles to our clients, show them how to needle themselves, give them tools, give them moxa. Herbs take more time, and give them the wisdom to understand the needles. Very safe, by and large, when you follow the certain rules. When using herbal medicine, and I'm certainly a proponent for testing in bioenergetic forms of testing to get an idea and a feel for how something is going to interact biochemically and bioenergetically and structurally for a person before they even ingest it. And this is something that, of course, people can look up as both applied and clinical kinesiology, and people can consider that if you go to a website like Quackbusters and Skeptic Raptor, you can see all the logical fallacies that are written on these subjects. But again, like you mentioned, people go to practitioners and they're going to correlate the results that they get from their practitioners. And if the results are stellar or just plain old pretty good, then they're going to refer out and people are going to trust them. And that's the portfolio of trust that I'm looking for. I want a portfolio of trusted, happy clients and practitioners and a network between both of them. I want everyone being all nice and plugged in and connected. And I want everyone to disconnect from looking for and paying for licenses. Like if every single license holder of all kinds just suddenly decided to stop feeding that system, and we're going to practice anyway. F you. We're practicing anyway. I'm not renewing my license next year. Mm-hmm. That would be something, huh? Like, oh, we've all decided to unplug. We don't need to pay every year. We don't need to pay every 2 years. We don't need your system anymore. You can go sit and spin, and you know which finger I'm holding up, and that is, that is basically all the old people who luckily are soon going to die. They're the ones who trust licenses. The young people are thinking and researching stuff. The young people are listening to the podcast like this. Young people are considering their options. Like, oh, young person listening, you're 20-something. You don't need to go through $50, $80, $90,000 of debt to be an acupuncturist if you can simply learn to use lasers, magnets, and frequency machinery on the acupuncture points. No license needed. Treat yourself, your family, and maybe even go fully into business as an herbalist using those tools as well. Mm-hmm. You don't need to go through that debt. You don't need to go through that training. All these people out there can be like, oh, that's an option. Oh, Yeah. Or you could choose to go through it if you have the money, I understand. And there are some beautiful teachers in acupuncture colleges out there. But what I would encourage is more of an unplugging and more of a plurality to be put forward. Mm. So that more people could just stop thinking the same thoughts that the old people who are soon to die and go away are thinking, and start thinking new thoughts. Add the question mark to the end of the sentence. How can you learn to do what we do? How can you learn to do better than what we do and treat the health of yourself and your family? I want to just put that question into this discussion.
Yeah. That's really, really great. That's so true. And the one thing I just thought of was that I'm sure there are a lot of practitioners who, went through all that schooling and spent all that money and passed their boards. And then if they come up, if somebody who wants to learn what they learned just by apprenticing under them, ask them to do that, they would say, no, go through what I went through because I went through that and you have to go through the same thing, which is very sad, if that were to happen, because just like you said, perpetuates this system that is immoral and is robbing everybody. So
sounds like an old person.
Yeah,
that's an old way of thinking.
Probably,
old of mind or old of body or both.
Right.
And I understand that. And I have to say this. I mean, I like people, old and young. I don't like old thinking, and I am glad that by and large, the young people that I've met and spent time with, they are not thinking like that. By and large, they're questioning more. They are extremely critical, skeptical, and very questioning, very humble. They have flexibility. They have optimism. They might not know what their trajectory of their life is, but they know they've got a little more time to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And old people, like you described with a practitioner who's not willing to apprentice someone and wants someone else to go through the hard times that they went through, well, that's a person who's pretty out of touch with their own feelings. Because if you went through something like a concentration camp to, be able to get to own your house in France, why would you ever want someone else to go through a concentration camp? You have to be pretty disturbed to do that,
Right.
So I would, this is why I look towards promoting methods that are done alone and one-on-one and in groups to learn to honor the feelings that are going on and what motivated those feelings, like a feeling of frustration at the thought of an up-and-coming practitioner who avoided the hardships that you personally had to endure. And understand what motivated that, and which is that you feel sad that you went through that crap, and you feel frustrated and maybe even ashamed of that you didn't find an easier way to get there, and then you could feel fearful that what if this new person takes your clients, as if you own your clients, not understanding ownership again,
Stole my client.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't own your client in the first place. We're not in slavery,
Right.
People choose who they choose, and It's like dating,
Right.
You stole my boyfriend.
That's funny. So before we
Yeah.
go, I don't want to keep you too long, but before we go, please talk a little bit about your, your approach to relationships and peaceful parenting, and I assume that relates to nonviolent communication as well.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work regarding the Mankind Project, which is some men's groups that sit in circle, people who like work to gain greater emotional literacy and knowledge of the feelings going on, and greater knowledge of the stories that certainly I gain greater knowledge of the stories I tell myself about myself and other people in the world, and find ways to change those stories. I mean, things that go way back that have often been the cause of horrible trauma in my relationships of the past, and problems even with me and my daughter and with me and other people. Those are component usages. You can look up the Mankind Project and Wikipedia and other places and understand what I mean by that. I also sit in men and women's groups which utilize similar methods, so that, in a co-gender kind of way, coming to these things. I studied with Katie Testa, who you had on your show when we were in the Google Plus Hangout together. We both were training on our own and come together weekly using nonviolent communication methods, though at the same time, I was also using the trivium method of critical thinking as in the way that I understand it. Mm-hmm. I was finding that there were problems the way certain people applied nonviolent communication. If you've heard people use it and it sounds very scripty, or like that there are certain jargon terms that are being used, you, the listener out there, if you know someone who uses nonviolent communication, you might know of some people out there who have it expressed in a certain way that like, oh, I see you're feeling this. Is that because you're needing this? That type of thing. And I make very sure to train with nonviolent communication in such a way as I'm using it, but in no way can you tell that I'm using it, because I'm using it for myself, and I'm not trying to make a bridge with it necessarily right away. A bridge of empathy, of basically making a bridge is afterwards. So I found that was a really useful tool internally, just like training martial arts is really useful to be healthy internally. The other approach, interpersonally, just like with the martial arts, is very, very useful, because you can be able to, once you calm yourself down, you can understand what motivates someone with asking a few questions, and you can also become a far more connected person to other people by active listening, by responding or speaking to what the other person says, what's their observations, speaking to the other person's motivational factors that are called needs in NVC jargon, unfortunately. They call those motivational qualities needs, which is very confusing to anyone who doesn't study NVC, by the way. In fact, it's really confusing to people who don't study NVC. But if you and I did study NVC, I would say the word needs, just like with you and I studying acupuncture. I could, very simply describe Shaoyawan and, liver qi stagnation. And I could go right there. So I could speak to a person's strategies and actions. There are ways to use these tools to promote good relationships in general. I think that peaceful parenting, Danilo, I wanted to hear your take on this, because from my perspective, a lot of people have different ideas as if they can define it. In the same way as when people hear the word nonviolent communication, they think they can define what the methodology is without having looked it up. And a lot of people define peaceful parenting in what is actually permissive parenting, which is not the same thing. I kind of forfeited most of my parenting about 8 years ago when I moved here, unfortunately. And that's a huge sadness for me when I bring it up. You are in the midst of active parenting. Your little ones are, I don't know, possibly asleep by now.
Should be. They should be, but most likely not.
So okay, well they're getting there. So
yeah.
So you're with your little ones, and you have a real relationship with them and with your partner. I'm curious to hear your solid, description and definition of peaceful parenting.
Yeah. So, I am involved with a lot of homeschooling families, and so a lot of them are, amenable to these ideas of peaceful parenting, and unschooling. So I talk to them, and also on my channel, actually, I do a lot of focusing on people who practice peaceful parenting, unschooling, and homeschooling as a way to create a better world, and then as a way to eradicate the this mental idea of statism or the belief in authority, because statism starts at home. The kids, they become us. Whatever we are, they become, right? And so if we act from a place of authority where we could do no wrong, where we can mete out punishment violently, and we can't ourselves be punished for what we do, or we can't be judged in the same vein as they can because they are fundamentally inferior. That's not logically consistent. So so that's kind of the way I describe peaceful parenting is, in general, I say parent the way you want to see the world that they will grow up in. How do you want to see the future? That's how you parent your children. But also more specifically, it's I say that already we are superior to our children in that we are bigger, older, stronger, and more experienced in life. And so we already have this power differential that's inherent in the relationship. And so what I try to do is to nullify as much as possible that differential, because to emphasize that differential through use of punishments and violence and yelling is cowardly. It's really pretty absurd, because why do you need to have to emphasize that? That's just the epitome of cowardice. These people are or these children, they're young, they're small, they're inexperienced, they're weak, they're young, so they have so many disadvantages from our perspective. So the way I look at it, I try to nullify all of those as much as possible, talk to them on equal terms as much as possible. I try to be I say I want to be their friend or their peer, or if there's any power differential, I say, okay, I would like to be your advisor, right? And to give you advice, and that you will follow my advice, not because you have to or else you're going to get punished, but because you want to, because you see that my advice is valuable, because you have followed it in the past, right? And to allow children to make mistakes, because that's how we all learn, right? That's the best way to learn is trial and error. And so I definitely, which is why we're always out in the woods and camping and hiking and doing, making fire and catching frogs and doing all kinds of fun stuff in the woods. And one thing that I really got to appreciate is this one homeschooling family. Her kids, they're like 7, 6, and 2, and her kids are pretty proficient with knives. And she's Russian, it's a Russian family, and so that's one thing I learned from her is to be more comfortable around knives and children, which is shocking to most parents of kids that age, 6 and 5-year-olds like that. But it's amazing, when you really trust your children with things, they feel that, right? And they see that you trust them, and then they're not, they don't act like children anymore, really. They get pretty mature pretty quickly. So it's a beautiful thing. So that's kind of my approach is, I'd like them to follow my advice because they want to, not because they have to, right? And I'm not to say, I emphasize too, I'm not to say I'm a perfect parent, because, a lot of times I see myself, I see my father in me, in my parenting, and I try to catch myself, raising your voice. I don't hit my kids, but just raising the voice and just getting angry. And I'm like, okay, I have to calm down, take a deep breath, and, relax, and let's talk about this. And why did you do that? Try to reason with your kids as much as possible. And that's another interesting thing is when I see some parents talking to their kids, explaining in pretty intricate detail to, let's say, I don't know, a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and then people come over and say, "Why are you doing that? They don't understand reason. Why are you talking to them like that? You're just wasting your time." And so what I like to tell those people is that, when our children were born, they didn't understand English, right? But we still spoke to them in English, right? And eventually they learned English, right? Because we were surrounded by people speaking in English. So if you don't reason with your kids because you don't believe they understand how to reason, how do you expect them to reason or to learn how to reason? That's how they learn, is by you modeling such behavior. So it is no excuse not to do something just because they haven't, but just because they can't understand you, right? They will come to that point. You keep doing that. So yeah, it's so important for people to not only talk to your kids, but talk in a calm tone and get down to their level. Not like standing over them and towering, but kneel down, get down to their level. I think that's so important to really hear what they have to say and to respect it. And also one more thing I'll say is that as a child, for me, I remember feeling the idea that, I'm just a child. What use could I have to my parents? How can I possibly say something that they would value, in their lives and find useful? I felt like I was impotent. Like I couldn't say anything that they would find useful. I hated that feeling. And then finally, one day when I did tell them something that I found useful, I remember that, like, wow, they took my advice, and it's such a good feeling. So that's why I think it's so important to listen to our kids and what they have to say, and really take it seriously. It's not just a kid talking; it's a person, it's a human being. So that's my approach.
Beautiful. And so you have a group of other parents who also use these methods for their children, and you're friends with all of them?
Yeah. I mean, to varying degrees, they use these methods. I think I can explain it a little more with a little more clarity and lucidness than they can. But for the most part, yeah, we're a pretty good bunch of people. We're very tolerant, and we just came back from a camping trip, and my brother, my 24-year-old brother, went with us, and he was talking to me about their trip, and one thing that he said was he was really amazed and shocked at the level of maturity and tolerance out of all of us, because we're all different. We all parent our kids slightly different ways, but it doesn't matter. You're tolerant of other people and how they do things, and that's the whole idea. I hate it when homeschooling families who are inherently different, like people choose to homeschool because they're critical of the one-size-fits-all government school system. And so they do things differently. And then what's funny is that when homeschooling parents get together and they criticize each other for the way the other person homeschools, I'm like, that's the whole idea. Everybody does it their own way. It's not going to be the same thing. And that's a beautiful thing. I love that everybody does it their own way. And so I kind of point that out to them sometimes. I'm like, why are you criticizing other people? This is the whole idea, is you get to do it your way. And that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, so it's a great bunch of people.
There's that addiction to certainty, that desire to be really certain, to be fixed in your conclusion.
Yeah.
You just saw it right there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an attitude assessment. Like, I find that's been, over this last year, it's been like one of my favorite tools to assess attitudes and going on like that, because when I see that, I can find a way to connect with them internally at first, just to like recognize they have a strong conclusion and they're attached to it. And that's really important, because these are the parents of the children who my child was friends with. This was back when I lived in Vermont, when I was taking my child to other parents. Mm-hmm. I was starting to do that internally without knowing what I was doing. I did read The Continuum Concept by Gene Liedloft, and that book was my eye-opener before my daughter was born, to help me understand what was wrong with way parenting goes on in the Western world, and potentially what are ways that could lead to a more happy childhood. And that does include the child does get to play with knives and does get to have danger and does get to experiment. Mm-hmm. And so I got to see that with parenting, with my daughter playing up on the roof, and it was a flat enough roof in various parts. There's certainly danger, And she and her friends loved to go up on the roof. And some of the parents of these children hated it when I would let them all play up on the roof. And no one ever got hurt on the roof because children don't want to get hurt by and large, you know. And there were a lot of varieties of elements of pushing the envelope for courage, similar to, you know, all of this. This is kind of important. It's not perfect parenting; it's peaceful parenting. And you know, the only reason that it's a phrase is because alliteration is pretty sexy to most people. Everyone loves alliteration, and I think that what you were describing was like emulating a behavior to the children. They can express their frustration and anger. They're learning to understand where their emotions come from, and that could take a little time to help them fully get a grasp on that. If you don't personally have a grasp on what motivates your own feelings, emotionally speaking, how could you possibly emulate it to them and show them control? That would be a question, you know. And of course, you know, with skill, you learn to do that, and you learn how to communicate, you learn how to set boundaries for yourself, and to certainly help them set their own boundaries so that they can make their own area where they have control. So when I was parenting, my daughter had control of her room. So it was a mess because that's how she wanted to do it. So I let her do that for years. At this point in her life, she no longer does that. She's, you know, that was back then when she was a little kid. She experimented with that for years. Now she doesn't want to live in a mess because, you know, she experiences that. Setting boundaries for yourself and helping to show a child how to set boundaries for themselves is a way to preserve harmony. With boundaries that are mutually known and understood and respected, you have no conflict. Like, who owns your feelings, Danilo? Who is causing you to be pleased or angry about this specific podcast that you're making? And if you took 100% responsibility for your own feelings, just for now, at least intellectually speaking, you just understood that external events happen and you interpret those events and that inspires your feelings. And what are you personally going to do about it is 100% in your control, because you're not in a prison cell. You're able to create things like that. Well, that type of thinking and that type of dealing with your emotions as a real adult is something you can emulate to children. And what I would certainly encourage the listeners out there who do have children is to respect that their children are just barely learning to, you know, experience and recognize and fully flower out with all of their feelings. They're the ones that I would wish to give greater latitude, and that they have obviously less control over that aspect of their life. We are the ones who have the capacity to demonstrate that we have control over that, not repressed control. There's times to demonstrate anger and frustration, but to show that you have control is a really excellent thing to emulate. That you know, when troubles arise, that you're the cool cucumber, you know, that kind of thing. And that when there is a boundary problem and a conflict, that you have communication skills to find out who owns what. There are many parenting styles to help with that. I think the parent effectiveness training is one of those things. I don't specifically subscribe to that one. I'm a lot more of using the tools that you've heard me already describe in this show. But just to understand that children are born into a form of captivity. In other words, they have less capacity. They can't just suddenly run off, get a job, get an apartment, get a car. There's all these barriers to entry for them in such a big way.
Barriers to exit.
And yeah, and there's so that for them it's essentially a barriers to exit. Yeah. So they're in a form of captivity. Right. And it's an opportunity as a parent to help them go from that captivity to freedom. And if it's in a smooth, effective transition from child to adult, and there's no need for any in-between time, that transition could happen for anywhere between age 12 to 18. I don't even know when. There's no specific age. It's about when do they acquire the internal skills to manage themselves and the external skills to manage the world. And it's an opportunity as a parent to help them to demonstrate a life that makes sense for you, and then to help them find a trajectory and a life that makes sense for them. I wanted to put that one out there.
Yeah, great. You brought up some really great points. This can be a show in itself, peaceful parenting. But let me just say real quick before we go that you remind me of a few points. And one of them is, when you say emulate certain actions, one thing I like to tell people is that, be the parent or be the adult that you want them to be. And because so many people, they get angry at their kids and they yell and they shout and they throw things and they're like, why aren't you listening to me? And I look at people like that and I'm like, is that how you want your child to be? Is that you want your child to act? Who is the mature adult here? Children are inherently immature in many places, including emotion. So you need to be the model, right? So you need to calm down. You need to take a deep breath, and especially my mother-in-law. She's a little bit like this as well, and I'm constantly telling her this, which pisses her off. But I say it anyway. And then there's another thing that you kind of remind me of is that when kids fall and they get hurt and they're crying. And then on top of the pain of all that, I guess humiliation as well, parents get angry at their kids for falling. And like, again, adding salt to the wound and how it's difficult. Like I find myself sometimes almost doing that, and I'm like, all right, take a deep breath, calm down. They didn't fall on purpose. It was an accident. And so, I have to calm down and help them up and, comfort them. So, or some parents even go even worse than that. Like they don't even get angry. Some parents don't even look at their kids. They're like, oh, he just wants attention. Oh my God, that breaks my heart when I hear that. Like they're just crying for attention. Oh my God, just gives me. I
think there's
chills.
A lot of parents. That's pretty tragic. That they didn't really schedule the learning that seemingly you and I did before being a parent and while being a parent. They didn't understand the time and the money that this would cost. If you chose to have a child, but you didn't choose to have the actual money to spend the time with your child, and you're always sending them somewhere else, taking them somewhere else, outsourcing all of this time of your child to someone else, I see that as kind of ill-conceived, like not really thinking about it. And of course, for many parents to actually bear witness to that, wow, look at the job you're doing right now. How much time do you really spend with your child? And this, of course, is an advantage that you have as a homeschooler. And at some point, I definitely am curious about your studies of autodidacticism and self-directed learning of children and so-called unschooling. You familiar with that term?
Oh, of course. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess we gotta we'll do this for another time. Maybe we'll do another.
Yeah, that'll be next one.
That's an awesome topic as well, unschooling. So, we will definitely have you back on. It seems like this conversation is unfinished. So, so please. Before we go, just let everyone know where they can find you, how they can reach you if they want to follow you.
Right on. Please, you can certainly look my name up on Facebook and certainly go to voluntaryvisions.com. You can definitely contact me email-wise, Darrell@voluntaryvisions.com. How to spell my name is right there in the show notes for this show. And I would say for people who are looking for holistic healthcare consulting, I do that for people around the world when necessary to find people proficient solutions to their healthcare problems, to find how to research and find a proficient holistic healthcare provider in your area, wherever the hell you are. And that you can still reach me through Darrell@voluntaryvisions.com.
Awesome. And another question I often ask my guests is, what is your favorite quote of all time?
So I think I'll go with the Viktor Frankl one, because it's really cool. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our ability to choose our response. And in our response is our freedom.
Ooh, I like
and
that.
If I didn't get that correct, then that's a close paraphrase of Viktor Frankl's quote.
Wow.
He was someone who survived one of those concentration camps back in World War II.
Wow, very cool. I never heard that quote. That's really awesome. Wow, great conversation, Darrell. Thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. So if anybody wants to help me out, you can do so through Bitcoin, PayPal, or Patreon. Links are below in the description. That's patreon.com/Peaceful Anarchism to help me out. $1 show is all I ask. If you find value in this content, please feel free to donate. Value for value. That's the capitalist way. Right? I respond to incentives like any other person. So this, although this is a free content, it was not free to make. Right? There's always opportunity cost to everything we do. So thank you very much for listening. This is Danilo from peacefulanarchism.com on the Voluntary Virtues Network and the Seeds of Liberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up at any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.